Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Reducing Uncertainty During Change, hosted by HRDQ and presented by Rick Lepsinger. My name is Sarah Schaefer, and I will moderate today's webinar. The webinar will be about an hour, and if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into that chat box. We will be answering these questions as they come in live at the end of the presentation or in an email if we do run out of time. A virtual team expert with more than 30 years experience, Rick Lepsinger is the president of On Point Consulting. He is the co-author of several books on leadership and organizational effectiveness. Rick currently sits on the faculty of GE's Management Development course and leads the program making GE's global matrix work. Welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I appreciate everyone joining us today for a conversation around reducing uncertainty during change and how to increase the likelihood that your change initiatives will be successful. When we were doing the global study for my book, Closing the Execution Gap, we discovered 5 factors that were critical for effective execution, and one of those factors was the ability to manage change effectively. And because that was such a prominent component of execution, we actually did a separate study to try to understand what really differentiates the organizations and the leaders that are most effective at managing change, and thereby also being highly effective at executing plans and strategic initiatives. So we had 3 key questions that we were interested in. We wanted to understand what does it take to introduce change effectively, and what do these companies do that's different than those that don't seem to be able to communicate as well. We wanted to understand what top performing companies do differently than poorer performing companies, and specifically we wanted to understand the leader's role. What can they do and what do they do that has the greatest impact on being able to both reduce resistance and to deal with the uncertainty of change. Some of you have seen this statistic before. 70% of change initiatives fail. When I started to do a little bit of looking behind this number, because I was trying to update my presentation and I wanted to see what the current statistic is, some of you may be shocked to find out that the current statistic is still 70%. This first came out in 1995, the first study. 70% of change failed in 1995. And in 2016, 70% of change still fails. For some reason, despite the investment we've made in skill training, in processes for sponsoring and championing changes and managing change, we still have not been able to move the needle on this particular statistic. And today we'll talk a little bit about both why that's the case and what we can do to change that in our organizations. So leaders still get a poor rap on this thing around managing change, even all these years. In our study, only 46% of the people we surveyed believed that their companies were good at introducing or managing change, which is not a particularly good statistic, especially since we've been working at it for so long and so hard. In addition to that, and this is actually even more disturbing, 43% lack confidence that their organization will implement a change effectively. So that's a weak place to start in general. But let's take a look and see what you think in terms of what you see as some of the contributing factors, what makes it difficult to manage change. And what you see up on the screen are 3 general comments, the conventional wisdom. Sarah's going to open up a polling question for you. And I'd be interested in your opinion, and you can select as many as you think are true. And we'll just see what's going on there. So please feel free to select as many as you like. And the votes are coming in. We'll wait till we get about at least 75%. And there are even some people who are still joining. Just give it another moment or two. Okay, oh good, interesting pattern, very interesting pattern. Okay, Sarah, why don't we close the poll now? All right, so it appears that the majority of you seem to feel that employees fear change, prefer the status quo as the primary. Right behind that, changes are happening too quickly, and of course, the entrenched workforce. Only a few of you felt that it was none of the above. So Sarah will move on to the slides. So let's take a look and see what's actually going on there. As it turns out, it was a little bit of a trick question because it really turns out that this conventional wisdom of why change fails is really not the case. In our study, we found that 83% of people believe that their concerns about change can be overcome, and they can even get excited and enthusiastic about change. 41% believe that the pace of change in their organization is just right, and 36% believe it's too slow. So this whole idea of change being too quick for around 77% of the people, that turns out to not be the case. I had another statistic here for you. There were 85% of people believe and understand and appreciate that organizations need to change in order to continue to grow and win in their industries, and 75% of people report that they are comfortable with change. So where does that take us? What does that mean? In general, what that means is that frequently managers are their own worst enemy. People are not the problem. For the most part, it has to do with either the process or the way leaders engage with individuals that tends to create problems and resistance when dealing with change. And the basic premise here is that it takes more than a burning platform. It's not enough to make the business case. And it's my belief and experience that managers rely too heavily on making the business case. We've got to change. It's important to change. The competition is changing. We've got to stay things. And to just say that, and then people would understand it and then automatically move with. But as it turns out, that's actually not the case. One of the things we found is that the causes of changes failing have to do with the feelings of uncertainty, and that managers need to be able to respond to 5 critical questions to be able to deal with uncertainty and put people at ease around it. It's about why is the change necessary, which is the business case. So again, the business case is important, it's relevant, but it's not sufficient to be able to drive change in the organization. The other things have to do with how will we manage a transition, where are we in this process, specifically what will I be expected to do, and will I be able to do it? And if managers are able to deal with these 5 questions, generally speaking, changes can be a bit smoother. So let's take a look at the 2 questions around how will we manage a transition and where are we in the process. Now, not to minimize the importance, but a lot of this is really about common sense. So the things that we found that top performing companies do are not going to be like, holy mackerel, who knew that? Or gee whiz, I didn't know you were supposed to do that. The difference is not only are they aware of it, but they seem to be able to do it. They seem to actually be able to execute. So the first has to do with identifying obstacles and actions to address the obstacles. And what this is about is being honest and transparent about what's in front of people, not trying to wrap it up in a soft sort of glowy sort of package, but to be really clear about what's in front, but also to demonstrate that they've thought through what these potential problems will be and obstacles, and they are prepared to handle it. The second has to do with ensuring adequate resources. Now, many of you would be familiar with this idea of lots of change going on. One of the main reasons why change initiatives fail is that they are under-resourced. And I work with one organization that would launch a change, they'd resource it, they'd launch another change, and then they'd pull resources off of that in order to get the new change initiative up and running. And they wondered why the previous one started to stall and slow down. So this also goes back to prioritization, which we'll talk about a little bit later. The third is around being realistic. A lot of times we want people to be excited about the change. We don't want them to be concerned about the change. So we imply that it'll be easy, that we'll get it done quickly, and you'll be able to do it while you're doing your day job. But the more effective organizations are actually realistic about how long it's going to take in order to accomplish this change, and related to the resource availability, making sure that people have time to be able to address these. The others come down to, again, frequent updates around where things are, what we're running into, giving employees an opportunity to provide input and guidance, both in terms of what they see and their suggestions for overcoming obstacles. And the third is around, or the sixth overall, is around aligning the performance management system. This is a highly underutilized tool. Many people see it as sort of around giving people a psychic hug. It's all about the end of the year review. It's all about pay and compensation. But the performance management system is one of your best tools for being able to manage the business. And if you're able to put the change objectives and specific change behaviors, integrate that into the performance management system, it makes it more accessible, more straightforward, more transparent for managers to be able to manage performance on a daily basis consistent with the change overall. That fourth question was around, what will I be expected to do? Now, this is another place where change initiatives tend to stumble a bit, where we lay out the change goal. We lay out the vision overall. But it's critical to be able to translate goals into behavior, not just talk about what you're trying to make happen, but talk about how, what it is they need to do. Specifically, if you can't name the behavior that you want people to change or what you want them to do, it's much less likely, highly unlikely, that you're going to get that intended result or that particular outcome. So here are a few examples of goals. Focus on high margin products, improve collaboration. All these things are very good. They're things you should start with, but you need to go further if you want to clarify for people what it is they need to do to support the change. When you just lay out the goal, everybody sort of tries to interpret that based on what they think is the right thing to do, and you get a lot less consistency, continuity across the organization. So you want to make it more specific, and you want to be very clear and specific about exactly what you're looking for people to start doing, to keep doing, and to stop doing overall. So what does this mean in terms of the leader's role? What does this mean about what does it really take to transition people, to move people through change, and to help people get more further along in terms of their level of readiness? So what we did is we took a look really outside the business community, and we took a look at in a more of a clinical environment where counselors were working with people with addictive behaviors, people who were working with drug addicts, drinking problems, eating disorders. We were looking for difficult behavior to change, and our thinking was, if you're able and had a way to change addictive behavior, then that might be a good starting point to figure out how to change behavior inside organizations where we're asking people to do things that are much more mundane than, maybe transition from paper-based to an online system, collaborate more, work more across organizational boundaries. Doesn't seem to be nearly as challenging or demanding as kicking a drug habit or changing your eating habits overall. So what do we learn from changing addictive behavior? We know that successful change does not come from desire or motivation. People change when they're ready to change, not when they're motivated to change. Now, this is a little bit counterintuitive, but think about yourself or people you know. Some people are motivated to stop smoking. They're motivated to change their eating habits. And I live in New York City, and on television they have, and you might have seen these advertisements where they show people who have been smoking for a while and its impact on them physically with either losing appendages or their voice box, and you see some of these graphic illustrations. And if that doesn't motivate you to stop smoking, nothing will. Yet, many people are unable, and it's because they're not ready. So a big part of what the manager's job is about is not just getting people motivated, make the business case, encourage them to do it, but it's getting them ready to change. What we also know is you don't just go from not being ready to being ready, that you move through 5 levels of readiness. Some people move through them quicker than others, but everybody goes through each one of the 5. We also know that there are specific strategies that can be used at each one of the levels to shift people from one level to the next, but they need to be used at the right time. Some of these strategies used prematurely or too late will not have the intended impact. And the last is that change is not linear. People don't move sort of step 1, step 2, step 3, that they tend to recycle. You may go forward 2 steps, back 1 step, but it's not just you go forward and you stick there. Sometimes people rethink, reinvestigate. And I'll say more about this later, but often we interpret that as resistance when in fact it's them processing overall. So let's take a look at the 5 levels of change, and we'll also talk a little bit about tools that the leader can use to move people through these levels, as well as strategies for each one. So the first is zero intent to change, and this is where they not only don't recognize the need to change, they don't even see the problem. And it's not like just pure resistance, it's not just being stubborn. They really don't get that there's any need to do anything different than what it is they're already doing. When you move them to contemplating change, here you're getting them to think about using the behavior or think about changing the behavior. But they haven't yet made their decision. They haven't decided, they're kind of still on the fence, but at least now you've moved them to thinking about the pros and cons, investigating some of the information, right? So there's no use to the behavior, but the resistance, and their resistance has decreased, their openness is gradually increasing. And as you continue to decrease resistance and increase their openness, you can move them to the planning and preparation stage. This is where they are getting ready to actually embark on the behavior change. They're preparing to do the change. This is where you buy the elliptical or the treadmill, to put into your house because you're getting ready. You buy the running shoes because you're getting ready to do the exercise. What you notice is that they're talking about it a little bit more, but they're also talking about the how-to component. They're testing the idea, trying it on a little bit, right? So they're starting to demonstrate a bit more commitment, but their action is not yet visible. And that's where you need to move them over that little edge, because people can get stuck in the contemplation and plan stage for a long time. You need to give them that little nudge to move it into visible action, to get them to start to try it out, to just do it, right? It may not be consistent, but at least they're starting to test it and try it on until over time that new behavior becomes the habit. It replaces the old behavior, and they have consistent demonstrated use of that behavior. Some people move through these levels rapidly. Some people are much slower. The challenge for the leader is to pick each person up where they are. So a client once said to me that frequently managing change is really a one-on-one activity, and although you can communicate with large groups and talk to the team overall, when it comes down to it, the day-to-day is really a one-on-one interaction with the leader and the members of his team. So what is the leader's role, and what is the best way to approach it? Again, coming from this clinical environment, one of the things we found is that a reflective, empathetic style is much more effective than an authoritative one when you're trying to change people's behavior. And just quickly, in terms of the study that this is based on, and there were numerous, they took a look at a psychiatrist working with a patient, and they were observing both parties. And the more the patient was more authoritative, basically explaining to the person why they need to change, telling them that they can change, helping them understand the impact it's having on others and why they need to do something different, the more the other person tended to dig in. They tended to, their reaction was to explain and defend why what they were doing was more effective. However, when the psychiatrist in this case was more empathetic, when they asked people what they thought about the need to change, how they felt about the change, why they thought it was important to change, why they thought it wasn't important, how confident they were that they could make the change. This contributed more to change talk, to the person talking themselves into why this is important and why they should. They were much less resistant and much more open to the conversation. And likewise, frequently leaders create their own problems. By being too directive and authoritative, we tend to create resistance when there actually is no resistance there. So this whole notion of change talk becomes a critical component of both removing uncertainty and helping people deal with change. Change talk are employee statements, not leader statements, but employee statements that represent positive reasons for supporting the behavior change or the overall change initiative. And this is a helpful tool because it helps the leader do two things. It helps you assess where people are in the change continuum, how ready they are, right? But it also helps you increase readiness because it's through the act of change talk that people sort of process and help convince themselves and move themselves along the change continuum. Now, of course, the leader is facilitating the process with key strategies along the way, and we'll talk about that in a bit. In addition, the more the change talk, the more the person is seriously thinking about changing, and again, the job of the leader is to engage people in this talk rather than telling them what they should do. It should be reinforced whenever possible. And here are a couple of tools that you can use to help facilitate change talk, to help assess where people are, and to help move them along the change continuum. The first is importance. And you would ask someone how important they think the change is and ask them to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And when they answer, you respond by saying, why isn't it lower? Now that may be a little counterintuitive because we would naturally want to ask, why isn't it higher? The problem with asking why isn't it higher is that then they start to talk about all the negative aspects of the change and why they didn't rate it higher. When you ask them why isn't it lower, they now talk about the positive aspects of the change and why they didn't rate it lower. So again, it's getting them to focus on importance, but trying to help them look at, explore, and investigate why this is something that is necessary to do. The second question has to do with confidence. And here you'll ask people how confident they are in their ability to make the change and rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And when they reply, you would respond by asking, why it's not higher. Now here again, you want them to share with you what their concerns are, what their anxieties are, what their worries are, what they see as the key obstacles. This information is critical for you to be able to understand when and how to intervene, right? It may be a coaching intervention, or it may be one of the other strategies. And then you need to focus on building confidence. And one of the ways to build confidence is to do the looking back exercise, to have them think about situations where they faced similar change, but they were able to overcome it. The second tool you have is a pro-con analysis. We are literally asking them to think about the advantages and the disadvantages of staying the same, and think about the advantages and disadvantages of changing. And you make this part of the conversation. It could be done one-on-one. It might be interesting to do it in a group as well. And then over time, as you engage people in this conversation, as the advantages of staying the same decrease and the advantages of changing increase, people start to move along the change continuum, and their level of readiness tends to increase. So importance and confidence, the pro-con analysis are two key tools. And while you are using this, you want to make sure you are reinforcing change talk. And two techniques for doing that is, the first is pressing for specifics. You want to encourage them to give more detail, not to let them just get by with, yeah, we really got to do this, but really move into it to say, what do you mean? Say more, give me an example, to really encourage the dialogue. You'll notice that it sounds a lot like coaching, and in many ways, moving people through this change, increasing their change readiness, can be seen as a coaching interaction. And you also want to reinforce positive change statements. Agree with things they say that are both appropriate and supportive of the change, and reinforce those positive changes overall. So this is kind of an overall diagram that just shows where we're headed and what you can do to increase readiness, and it shows here the strategies. So on the top in blue, you see the various phases of change readiness, where you are trying to reinforce change talk and move them along. But in line with that, it's not enough to just talk about the change. You also need to apply some specific strategies for each one. So let's take a look at what those strategies are. And you can see here that it's to move from stage 1 to stage 2, it's logic and facts. To move from 2 to 3, it's using emotions and values. From 3 to 4, it's that call to action. And from 4 to 5, it's reinforcement and support. And as I said, the key here is to use these strategies at the right stage. So you need to be aware of where they are and then bring these strategies to bear. So let's take a look at the first set. For logic and facts, there's sort of two components here. One is providing them with information and providing them with feedback. Remember, they're at stage 1 now, and you're trying to increase their awareness about the need for change in general. So you might provide information about the impact of using or not using the new behavior, of doing it or not doing it. You might provide feedback to increase their awareness of their personal use. And here you would use data and facts and other people's input. Now, again, this is on a personal note. When I was in college, my father used to send me articles about, he interested in guiding my career choice. And he would send me articles about that career, and how good it was, how much money they made, how happy they were. I didn't realize it at the time, but he was trying to move me forward, because at that time I really wasn't interested in any career overall. But he would send me facts and data to help me do that. And that's a little bit like what this is. It's around providing information, providing feedback, and showing people the impact of not making the change. The other component here is giving people an opportunity to explore other alternatives and options, rather than saying to people, this is how you do it, rather than saying, this is the way I expect you to do it. The idea here is that you would be providing them more with an objective, a standard, be clear about the behaviors, but that let them think about the different ways to handle situations, expanding their understanding of options and choices, different ways to engage in that target behavior. Now, this is particularly good at all the levels to move people from 1 to 2, which is the zero intent to contemplation. It's good to move people from contemplation to planning and prep, and it's good to move people from planning and prep along the to some real visible action as well. So let's take a look at some the hands-on tools, and here you see 3 examples of hands-on tools that are available for this strategy, what it looks like in fact. And Sarah's going to open up a polling question, and I would like you to select as many of these tools, there's 3 of them, that you think are appropriate for this first strategy, which is logic and fact, which would be knowledge and feedback, or exploring alternatives. So if you take a look and click on the one that you think would be most appropriate here. All right, so they're coming in. I'll just give it a few more moments. I think you'll be interested in seeing this pattern. Just wait a couple minutes for folks. Okay, Sarah, you can close that poll, please. Okay, so, oh, it's a tie. Look at that, a dead heat for A, provide teams with 360 feedback and discussing the important value to the targeted behavior. A few of you selected B, and actually B is not the appropriate answer here. C is not a bad answer, but C is more related to the emotional values piece, moving them from 0 to 3. But the best answer here is A, providing people with feedback so they get a chance to see both their behavior through the eyes of others and maybe even its impact. So Sarah, if you take us back. The next set of strategies are emotion and value and values, and this is about moving people from from contemplating change, because we got them to think about it. Now we want them to move toward the planning and prep side. So this is about trying to tap into strong emotions that people might have about their desire to change. Help them really think about the consequences of not changing, and using any sense of distress or concern they might have to increase their motivation, their desire to act differently than they currently are now. In addition to that, the second component of emotion and values is comparing to self-image. Now, you may know that we all have a certain image of ourselves that we believe true about ourselves and that we want others to believe as well. And here you're helping people see the dissonance between their self-image and the targeted behaviors that you're asking them to change. And you're asking them to think about how they want others to see them and how they want to see themselves, and how those behaviors fit into this picture of self overall. So let's take a look again at some of the tools. Here, once again, you see 3 examples, possible examples of tools that will be used during this stage of emotion and values, and Sarah will open up a polling question for you. And please select as many of these as you think are appropriate. Okay, so we have a few coming in now. Again, you can select as many as you think would work here. Okay. Oh, they're still coming in pretty steady. We'll give it another moment. Okay. All right, Sarah, if you please close the poll. Let's see what we have. All right, hey, again, very, very close, A and C. So A is the slight lead on that. B had the lowest number. As it turns out, B would be the best fit here, helping teams see that having no targeted behaviors may hurt others. Having teams talk to other people who use the targeted behaviors actually happens a little bit later. It's really more around the support side, although it's not a bad tool here. And identifying milestones for targeted behavior is not about tapping into emotion and value. So B would be the best. A is a good one here, but B is a little bit better. Let's see what the next strategy is, Sarah. Okay. So the third here is call to action. Now, what happens here is that, sometimes people will get stuck in this contemplating change piece, or even the the planning and prep side, and you want to really move them forward to start to demonstrate visible action. And this is much more straightforward. This is really where you're asking for a commitment, right, to change the behavior. Asking them to make a commitment, probably either to you or out loud, and ask them to really just do it. And this is appropriate both moving them from planning to visible action and from visible action to habit. So let's take a look at the polling question. And again, here you have 3 choices. Let's see which one you think belongs with the call to action. Select as many as you think are appropriate. Okay, I'll just give it a few more moments. They're still coming in fairly steadily. Okay, why don't we stop it there, Sarah, please? Okay, let's see what we have. We've got the majority of folks have C, have teams set dates for using the new behavior, and that is actually the best choice here. Discussing the pros and cons is actually good. It's usually better in the earlier stages. Now you're really trying to move them forward. And when you see teams retreat to old behaviors, bring it up. That's not a bad idea, but it might be a little bit premature here, because here you're really trying to get them to consistently demonstrate the behavior. So it's C would be a bit better. So let's move to the next strategy. Okay, and as I said before, it's not a linear process, and frequently people will take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. The key for leaders here is not to treat the regression as resistance. Frequently people will hover around contemplating change and planning and prep and jump back and forth, or they might demonstrate visible action and start to regress and go back to planning or even contemplation. The mistake leaders make is to treat that as resistance, because when we treat it as resistance, people tend to act resistant. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's just like the therapist in the study I told you. The more we see people resistant, we treat them like they're resisting, and then they keep resisting. The idea here is to take this people raising questions, take them, the thinking, the concerns they raise as part of the process of contemplation or planning and prep. But once you move them to visible action, you now want to reinforce and support. Again, the mistake some people make is to reinforce and support too early, before people demonstrate action. I don't want to necessarily reward you for thinking about it. I mean, I want to recognize it's nice if you do, but I really provide positive recognition when you start to demonstrate the behavior. That's when that should really kick in. And you might even ask people to do a little reward for yourself. You know how you sort of set a target for yourself, and when I finish this, I'll go, walk around, or I'll go have a cookie. You set those little targets for yourself. You can also restructure the environment where you want to change the key elements so there are reminders and supporters and reinforcers. that are always in front of people. One example is if you want sales and marketing to work together more effectively, you might actually put them in the same area, so it's easier to get with the other groups. And this is where you can enlist helpers. Now, enlisting helpers is useful during the whole process, but this is where it really kicks in, where you partner people up with someone who's already demonstrating the behavior, kind of a mentor and or a coach that can help continue to reinforce, provide coaching, provide feedback, and recognition when the behavior is being used effectively. So here's our last poll. Again, let's take a look and see which action would work best here. Again, pick all the ones that you think are most appropriate. And they're starting to come in. We'll give it just a couple of minutes. Okay, they're still coming in pretty steady. We'll leave it open for just a few more moments. Okay, Sarah, let's stop it for now. Thanks, everyone. And here we go. Okay, so again, the majority of you have B, which I think is right on target. And a couple people picked A, which is actually also very good. Identifying obstacles to task performance and removing them has to do with getting at the environment and rejiggering the environment. So in this case, A and B are both really good choices. Rehearsing the new behaviors, again, is not bad. That would even be better if you're moving down in the call for action to help people kind of get used to using the behavior, which is practice. It might be appropriate here where they're trying things on. It's a bit more appropriate in the call to action, but certainly could work here. So let's take a look at the slides, Sarah. We also wanted to understand what does it mean to be a good change manager, and this is kind of the close before we open it up to some questions. We always hear people say, he or she is a good change manager. They know how to manage change. And we were wondering, what really contributes to the perception that someone is a good change manager? What exactly are they doing? And what are they saying that indicates to other people that someone is a good change manager? So here's what we found. That when you behave in a way that's consistent with the change, when your words and deeds are consistent and you're actually doing what you're telling other people to do, that goes a long way to creating the perception that you're a good change manager. Fulfilling your commitments and promises, doing what you say you do related to the change goes a long way. The accurate, honest information, I think, is sort of the conventional wisdom, but it does seem to make a big difference in terms of how we perceive people as effective when it comes to managing change. Being aligned with other managers, both around the need for change and implementing the change, also seems to be a key component. So it's not just being an island, but it's demonstrating your ability to collaborate, cooperate, work well across organizational boundaries and with other managers. And the last has to do with ensuring that the timing of the change is realistic, demonstrating that you understand what's involved, what it takes to make this happen, and that you are realistic about due dates and timelines that you put in place, and you don't just expect things to happen right away because everything's important and people will just put in all that extra effort. This seems to really go a long way to impacting people's perception of effectiveness as a change manager. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. If you're interested in seeing a little bit more about the role, what it takes to manage effective change, and the role of change in enhancing execution, my book, Closing the Execution Gap, is available on Amazon.com. Also on my website, onpointconsultingllc.com. We have a lot of information, including blogs and other webinars on this topic that you might find helpful. So with that, Sarah, I'll turn it over to you and see if we have some time for questions.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Rick. That was wonderful. Yep, we do have about 15 minutes for that live Q&A. So attendees, go ahead and submit those into the chat box now. And while we wait for some of those questions to filter in, let me just share a little bit how you can keep in touch with us. You can connect with us on all social media. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn. And then also for joining us today, we are offering 10% off of your order. And this is a one-time purchase only. So you can go ahead and check out HRDQstore.com. And let's see. All right. We do have some questions coming in. So the first one is coming from Eric. Is this process U.S.-centric or is it applicable across cultures, some more than others?
Right. Yeah, Eric, I think that's a good question. Our study, our global study, really was across culture, across nationality, when we were taking a look at the common sense aspects of change and what differentiates top-performing organizations. The research that's on change talk and the working with addicts and the stages to change is more U.S.-centric. But I do think there are a number of things there, again, like this whole notion of change talk, and rather than making the business case to engage people in a dialogue about change and why change is important, and then responding to people's concerns and questions rather than just mandating that people change. I think that would be appropriate across cultures, because even in cultures where people would prefer a more authoritarian approach, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are enthusiastic and committed to the initiative, although they may demonstrate the basic sort of threshold level of change just to kind of move forward. But I think your point's well taken, and it's probably worthwhile to do a closer look at that.
All right, great, thank you. All right, moving on. Is there such a thing about giving too much information and guidance in which others may feel you're hand-holding?
Yeah, well, I think I'll take that in sort of two parts. The thing about too much information, the idea here is as much information as they need. So if you're providing information in response to questions, or if people are highly resistant and you're trying to help them see the value and need for change, I'm not sure you can give too much information. The idea of hand-holding, and I know that has a negative connotation to it, but I really do think a lot of managing change is being more hands-on and really guiding people through the process. So if what we mean by hand-holding is being a crutch and not really expecting people to change or sort of doing it for them, I would agree that that probably isn't what a good leader should be doing. But if hand-holding is around taking time to understand where the person is regarding the change, how they feel about the change, how confident they are about making the change, and then being able to use that information to fill the gap, to be able to help them both understand the need and be more confident, then I think it makes sense to do it. So I would certainly lean toward more interaction, more dialogue, more information than less, just in general.
All right, thank you. And our next question is coming from Mary. My team members are in different levels of being ready to change. How do I proceed?
Yeah, and that's actually the challenge. If only we had a homogeneous group. And I think that's also one of the reasons why a lot of changes fail, is that we treat the group as if everybody's the same. We talk to the group. We make big announcements to the organization. We have big rollouts of the change. But in fact, people are not in the same place. So the key is to identify where each person is and pick them up at that spot. The strategies for people who are at that zero intent are very different than somebody who's planning and preparing, or somebody who's demonstrated the change. So you need to both engage people in conversation to figure out where they are, and then bring the right strategy, the right behavior, pick them up where they are.
All right, thank you. All right, our next question is coming from Matt. How quickly do people move through the stages of change readiness?
Yeah, again, good question. And it's a human nature sort of thing. You know, more or less, you'll have 30% of the people who just move right to the, you know, let's do it. I'm ready. You know, what took you so long? You have 30% of people who hate it and don't want to do it and are very, you know, drag their feet, and 30% of the people sort of on the fence, you know, more or less. Everybody changes at their own rate and really for their own reasons. So a lot of that is really getting at the personal side of change. That's both with the fact-based side as well as with the values and emotion side, where it becomes a little bit more personal for them. But everybody moves at their own pace. And once again, it's your job, the leader's job, to kind of get in that rhythm. Now, again, if the pace starts to slow, part of your job is to help accelerate by using the strategies and moving it along. This is not sort of a laissez-faire where you let them just sort of move at their own pace, but you do want to give them a little room to spend some time contemplating, spend some time planning. But if you see they're stuck, you need to nudge them out. You need to move them along a little bit. And that's what the strategies are all about.
All right, thank you. All right, next question is coming from Janet. How do you work with an executive team for change where everyone is on board with the change except for the CEO?
Yeah, well, that's a problem. That'll be a problem. Again, if the issue there is, are they speaking up? In other words, has the members of the CEO's team expressed their point of view and their perspective? If the CEO is resistant, then again, it's a little more difficult, but how do you get clear about the why and what's behind that, and why is he ignoring his team or her team if they're all on board? So are they verbalizing their support for the change? Are they making their case? Have they provided facts and data? Have they basically used the strategies? You can use those strategies upward just as if you could use them downward as well. But it starts with articulating your point of view and trying to engage the CEO in change talk. It wouldn't be any different than if you were trying to manage downward as well. And if he has a coach, it's even better. If the CEO has a coach, that would be a great role for the coach to take. Sorry, Sarah.
Oh, no problem. All right, next question is coming from Tara. What's the biggest single mistake leaders make when they're managing change?
Yeah, that's actually difficult to pinpoint because there's so many places along the way where you can screw it up. You know, like, you know, relying too heavily on the business case, being too authoritative overall, treating change as a group process rather than an individual process. But I do think if you try to go back to the beginning, the origin, I think the biggest mistake leaders make is not prioritizing change initiatives where they roll out too many initiatives simultaneously and just expect everyone to sort of step up and put in that extra effort. And in line with that, it's being unrealistic about the time it takes to manage a change. And that really becomes a killer because people lose enthusiasm for the change, when it ends up dragging on. And if it doesn't happen, if that happens frequently, people just don't believe that the organization can manage a change in general. So if I had to pick a place, I'd start on that side of the continuum.
All right, thanks. And our next question is coming from Tina. Why hasn't the success rate of change initiatives improved over the last 20 years?
Yeah, well, we've kind of been speaking to that. I think, unfortunately, managers are busy. They're doing so many things all the time. And change initiatives just end up being one more thing they're doing. And they tend to see it as a separate event. So one thing is that they overly rely on the business case, on the burning platform to try to get everybody going. And they just hope that they can do the one big rollout, hey, let's go everybody, and then step away from it and just let it move on its own momentum. And the change will not move on its own momentum. It takes sort of care and feeding along the way because there's what we call a commitment dip. after the first month or so, people start to lose enthusiasm for the change when the reality of what they're doing kind of hits them and some of the actual problems and concerns start to become concrete and real. And if managers don't step in, when that commitment and enthusiasm starts to dip to sort of move it up again, you're really going to lose a lot of momentum and likely miss your change target overall. So it's that, and it's treating it as a group process rather than understanding that it's as much an individual process as anything else. And it's each manager's role down through the chain to be able to ensure that the members of their team are ready for this initiative and are prepared overall. So I think that's the main reason. We overly rely on process, change champions, change initiators, and not enough on the actual leader behavior day to day.
All right, wonderful. All right, these are some great questions. I think we're probably just going to have time for one more, and the last question will be coming from Marcus. Why don't leaders use the basic common sense actions you outline when managing change?
Yeah, it goes a lot back to what I was just saying before about, a lot of managers just don't take the time. It's a lot of work. It really is a lot of work. And it requires focused commitment to be able to move that change along. Plus, it also requires some degree of confidence. And again, many of you may have seen this or been on both sides of the event, is that when people raise concerns, when they raise questions, when they talk about why this change is lousy and why it shouldn't happen, just to exaggerate the point a little bit, we see that as resistance, and we treat it as resistance rather than treating it as exploring the change, trying to understand the change, working through the information, getting acclimated to it. So, rather than continue to be realistic about time frames and, prioritize changes, we're trying to make everything happen right away because everything's important. We're trying to move people along, and resistance is just slowing me down, so I got to push through that overall. And things that appear to be common sense require patience. Right? They require focus. They require consistency. And a lot of us either don't feel we have the time for it, don't trust that it'll actually have the desired impact that we're expecting, or we just want to get on to the next thing. So I think the common sense stuff just doesn't stick with us as well.
All right, great. Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much. And I know we do have a couple questions that we just did not get time to. So we are going to put those into a Word document, and then we're going to send those over to Rick. And then we'll probably send those out probably about mid-next week with all of the answered questions from Rick. All right, so would you just like to add any final thoughts before I go ahead and wrap up this session?
No, I just want to thank everybody for joining me on this session. I really appreciated it. And by all means, visit my website, onpointconsultingllc.com. We've got a lot of solutions regarding change, plus we got a blog there and a lot of free information and resources that you might find helpful. So thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you again, Rick. And for everybody on the line, we appreciate your time, and we hope you found today's webinar informative. Bye.